The Where Our Minds Wander podcast may contain sensitive content and explicit language. Listener discretion is advised.
Greetings, fellow wanderers, to the places our minds wander.
Where strange lights speed beyond reason across a clear night sky.
The house at the end of the road where disembodied voices whisper and strange noises make the living shiver.
Lurking shadows hiding on the edge of the woods just outside your back door.
Odd, true events throughout time that lead you down the rabbit hole. I'm Wes.
And I'm Beth.
And this is Where Our Minds Wander. Hello and welcome to Where Our Minds Wander, all you fellow wanderers. Hope you're all having a great day. I'm Wes, and that's my wife Beth.
Hello.
And each week we share stories that caught our attention. So if you're new to our podcast or a return listener, we appreciate you being here. So Beth, what'd you come up with this week that piqued your interest?
Well, before we get into that, I got a really cool Facebook message from my college roommate.
Oh.
So last episode, I covered the Dutchess County boomerang UFOs.
Yes, I was there for that.
And yes, you were. And after she listened to the episode, she messaged me and told me that she saw the same darn thing.
No way.
She did. And the weird thing is we've known each other 20 plus years. And we've never talked about it. It never came up in conversation that we both saw the same UFO.
That's peculiar.
So this is what she sent me. I remember it being dark. I believe I was alone because I remember being in the road, which means I was probably laying on the road to get the warmth emanating off it. In which case, the neighbors would have gone inside because that's a weird thing to do. I remember the V-shaped white lights, the gigantic size of it, and the fact that there was no noise. I also remember the stealth bomber being brought up years later as an attempt to explain what people saw. I still don't think it was the stealth. So she was outside her parents' house in Hopewell Junction, and I had said that reports had come in from Hopewell Junction that people had seen it. Isn't that wild?
That's really weird.
It's really wild.
I mean, you've known her all these years. You've never spoke about it.
Nope.
And this just happened to start a conversation.
Yeah, it triggered a memory for her. So that's pretty cool.
That's really cool. So what else do you have for us tonight?
Well, it's no secret that you and I have always wanted to stay in a haunted inn.
No, it's not.
So tonight I'm going to talk about the Tillie Pierce House Inn.
Oh, one of my favorite destinations that we went. Yes.
Yes, in Gettysburg.
Yes.
So a gazillion ghost stories have been told about Gettysburg, from Devil's Den to the alleys between homes where the overwhelming scent of flowers can be smelled with no discernible cause. Since it was the bloodiest and deadliest 3-day battle of the war between the states, where some 56,000 men lost their lives, it makes sense that Gettysburg would have its fair share of ghost sightings and reported hauntings. But I want to take us off the battlefields for a little bit and talk about one little inn and one little girl. Not Jenny Wade, who was the only civilian killed during the battle, but her friend, 15-year-old Tillie Pierce. Tillie Pierce was the youngest of 4 children of Margaret and James Pierce. James was a butcher and made a pretty good living. His personal property was valued at $6,500 in 1860.
That's a lot of money.
It is, and it made them one of the wealthier families in town. The Pierces, Margaret and James Sr., Tillie, her older brothers Williams and James, and sister Maggie, shared a home above their butcher shop with a 12-year-old servant boy and a 48-year-old seamstress. Tillie later wrote about her experiences in her book, At Gettysburg, or What a Girl Saw and Heard of the Battle. On the eve before the battle, she and her sister were sent home from school early, and the two of them joined a crowd on the street singing patriotic songs as soldiers marched past. She wrote, quote, "First came a long line of cavalry down Washington Street. Then wagon after wagon passed by for quite a while. Again, we sang patriotic songs as they moved along. Some of these wagons were filled with stretchers and other articles. In others, we noticed soldiers reclining, who were doubtless in some way disabled. It was between 9 and 10 o'clock when we first noticed firing in the direction of Seminary Ridge. At first, the sound was faint. Then it grew louder. Soon the booming of cannon was heard. Then great clouds of smoke were seen rising beyond the ridge. The sound became louder and was now incessant. The troops passing us moved faster. The men had now become excited and urged on their horses. The battle was waging. This was my first terrible experience. I remember hearing some of the soldiers remarking that there was no telling how soon some of them would be brought back in those ambulances or carried on the stretchers. I hardly knew what it meant, but I learned afterward, even before the day had passed. It was almost noon when the last of the train had passed, and I began to think of dinner and the folks at home." End quote. Later that night, her concerned parents made plans to send Tillie to what they believed would be a safer place, a farm owned by Jacob Weichert, the father of one of the family's neighbors, a Mrs. Shriver. The Weichert farm, Tillie was told, was located near the foot of a rocky hill south of Gettysburg, known as Round Top.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
As my grandmother would say, that's like jumping from the frying pan into the fire.
Right in the thick of it. What her parents could not have known was that as the Battle of Gettysburg raged over the next 3 days, their daughter would not only be in a position to witness the intense fighting which occurred nearby, but would also be called upon to help Army surgeons care for the fallen men. Tillie later wrote, quote, "The only preparation I made for the departure was to carry my best clothes down to the cellar so that they might be safe when I returned, never thinking of taking any along, nor how long I would stay." End quote. Tillie stayed at the Weichert farm with Mrs. Shriver for the entirety of the battle, witnessing many horrors. She wrote, "Someone said that the Pennsylvania Reserves were on the way, and having a brother in the 1st Regiment of the Reserves, I was anxious to see whether he would be along. As I went to the south side of the house, I looked in the direction of Round Top, and there saw the rebels moving rapidly in our direction. Suddenly I heard the sound of fife and drum coming from the other side of the barn. Then some of our soldiers shouted, 'There come the Pennsylvania Reserves!' The Confederates raced towards them, fired, halted, and then began to retreat. I saw them falling as they were climbing over a stone wall and as they were shot in an open space." And she was looking for her brother.
I know. That's just...
I can't imagine.
I can't even put it into words.
On this evening, this is, she's continuing to write, "On this evening, the number of wounded brought to the house was appalling. They were laid in different parts of the house. The orchard and space around the buildings were covered with the shattered and dying, and the barn became more and more crowded. The scene had become terrible beyond description."
I can imagine.
Tillie, at just 15, became a nurse to these men, providing comfort and whatever small things they requested. Most often it was tea and paper to write letters. She witnessed more than one death on her watch, but Tillie herself survived and returned, along with Mrs. Shriver, to their homes on Baltimore Street on July 7th.
Jesus, and she was only 15.
15 years old.
To step up like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's so brave.
She did what she had to do.
I guess so.
Uh-huh. Upon her return to the house, Tillie obviously wanted to know what her family had been through. So her father relayed the story that he had briefly left the house during the battle to see if his help was needed in other parts of town. When he was almost home, he was accosted by a group of rebels who demanded to know if there were Union soldiers in the house. Mr. Pierce assured them there were not. Imagine his shock when he went into his home and found 5 very badly wounded men that his wife had taken in.
Honey, I'm home.
I told them we didn't have any soldiers. Oh, well then.
One of those boots near the bed.
The family hid in the cellar throughout most of the daytime hours, tending to the wounded. Mr. Pierce, though, would often travel to the attic to keep an eye out for sharpshooters, accompanied by one of the wounded men, Corporal Michael O'Brien. On one occasion, they noticed several rebels on the roof opposite. The ensuing gunfire left 17 bullet holes in the Pierce house. Tillie wrote, quote, "Bullets were passing through the kitchen, over and around the stove. Bullets came through the south side of the room, striking and sometimes passing through the opposite side." End quote. And it's amazing to me that no one was hurt, because that is how her friend Jenny Wade died.
Right.
Was by stray bullets that went through her kitchen.
It's like a scene out of a movie.
Yeah. Corporal O'Brien also claimed that one night he heard rebel soldiers entering the house through the cellar. He crept to the first floor and hid under a skirted settee. Tillie wrote, "Hearing them come, he crawled under a settee that was standing in the hall. This settee had curtains around the lower part of it, which thus concealed him from sight. He said the rebels passed right by him, and he heard them wondering if there were any Yankees in the house. They did not go any further than the hall, and soon returned to the cellar. He assured us he took a good long sigh of relief after they had gone down and out, the way they had come in." Thankfully, the 3-day battle ended on July 3rd, 1863. A few days later, several soldiers showed up at the Pierce house, begging Mrs. Pierce to allow them to bring in their wounded colonel to convalesce. Mrs. Pierce agreed, and the man was carried to an upstairs bedroom. They quickly discovered the bed was too short. The footboard was removed and an extension added. Colonel Colville stayed at the Pierce home for many months until he was well enough to return to Minnesota. So, back to Tillie now and the infamous Tillie Pierce House Inn. So last summer, Wes and I planned a trip to the Gettysburg area to see my parents, and we decided we really wanted to stay at a haunted inn.
Supposedly haunted inn, yes.
Allegedly, yes. So I did a bunch of research, and the reports of the Tillie Pierce house seemed pretty tame. Online it said there was a supposed ghost cat, and people could hear footsteps pacing in the attic. So I booked 2 nights in the Blue Room, which seemed to have the most reported activity. And the inn on Baltimore Street, in the heart of Gettysburg, is rather unassuming when you first see it. It's a very small brick home. There's a narrow railed porch, barely big enough for a wooden chair, around the front door. The 6 rooms offered to overnight guests are each named after a Gettysburg resident who contributed to the helping of soldiers, friends, and neighbors during the battle. The second floor Blue Room, where we slept, is officially named the Hetty Schreiber Room.
Mm-hmm.
A large fireplace takes up one wall and a queen-size bed the other, and there's a narrow window that overlooks part of the street. The only curious thing we noticed was there was a basket of cat toys on a side table in the hall.
Yeah, where they encouraged guests to maybe make contact with the ghost cat.
Yes, because there's no living cat at the inn. When we first arrived, we dropped our stuff off, and Wes went down to the lobby to wait while I used the bathroom.
Mm-hmm.
What was that for?
Well, you know, every bathroom and every stop that we go to.
At least this one was in the room.
I'm surprised you just don't have a map of bathrooms of the United States.
I can't help it.
I know.
So I was rummaging around in my suitcase on the bed with my back to the bathroom, and I heard this kind of loud, exasperated huff behind me. It was like a, and at the time I was like, well, that was weird. I kind of laughed it off and thought, it's just pipe, like water, or not water, air in the pipes.
Right.
Right. So we went out and we did a bunch of stuff. We walked around.
Yeah, checked out the shops, see what kind of nightlife there was.
And then we went back to the room. And of course, we made sure the door was shut and locked. And just out of pure curiosity, we set up our digital voice recorder on the dresser across from the bed.
Right. I bought it just for the occasion.
Yeah. And I mean, I had read through the guest book earlier in the day where people write down things that had happened to them in the room. And most of the stories were about the ghost cat. People supposedly heard purring next to their ear in the middle of the night.
I find that quite comforting.
I know. So we weren't very optimistic about catching anything, for sure.
No, not at all.
So we had that running and we put on a podcast.
Because that's the only way I can go to bed at night is listening to podcasts.
And as I settled off to sleep, I thought, this room is kind of cozy. And I really don't think it's haunted at all. I think it's just hype.
Right.
It's another way for people in that area to bring in
business.
Bring in business.
Nothing wrong with that.
So we don't know what time it was, but we both awoke to the sound of our bedroom door shutting. And then we heard the distinct sound of the floorboards creaking as if someone was crossing the room right at the foot of our bed. We could both see that there was no one in the room with us. And even though I was laying right beside him, Wes asked, "Was that you? Is that you?"
And it wasn't.
It wasn't. I was not coming back from the bathroom.
No. You were still in bed.
I think I
was dumbfounded because I couldn't figure out what was going on. A little confused there because I heard the jiggling of the doorknob. And then I heard, the creaking, just the footsteps coming through.
Yeah, just the creaking of the floorboards.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, your first thought, of course, is somebody's coming in to see what they can take.
Right.
So we were a little confused, but there was nothing in the room. We kind of did a cursory glance around and we went back to sleep. So when we got back to New York, we were pretty anxious to upload the recording to see if we'd caught the door shutting and the creaking floorboards. And we were pretty shocked by what we heard.
That we were.
It's not creaking floorboards at all, but here, we'll play it for you. Who the heck walked across our room? Was it Colonel Koval? Was it Corporate O'Brien?
We'll never know.
We'll never know. We'll never know. But that's actually not all we caught.
No, that was tame compared to the next EVP we'll play for you. And you'll see what we mean. And
you may also hear a little bit of snoring. That would not be me.
Oh, yeah, sure. Like you don't snore.
We kind of tried to rule things out because there was no air conditioning. The window was closed.
Mm-hmm.
And if it had been some sort of mechanical thing, you would think it would be like every hour exactly, or every 2 hours exactly.
It doesn't even sound like a child to me. That's what's creepy.
Right. Well, Maggie died before Mrs. Pierce, but she was an older teenager. So I don't know.
It's menacing.
A little bit, yeah.
Had I heard that in the middle of the night, things would have been different.
Well, I've always been skeptical of the EVPs caught on the ghost hunting shows that we like to watch.
Yeah. I mean, you never know if they're being manipulated or not.
Right.
But I'm a bit of a believer now.
Yeah, once you catch one yourself.
Yeah.
And you listen and the shivers go down your spine. And
it's a whole new ball game.
You go, what the heck was that?
Yeah.
It's a whole new thing. So the little inn and the little girl are fascinating. And I'd really like to stay in another haunted inn, please.
Yeah. And perhaps you're ever in Gettysburg, you might want to check this place out.
As always, you can check my sources in the show notes. But I do want to mention that Tillie's book, where I got a lot of my information from, is called At Gettysburg, or What a Girl Saw and Heard of the Battle by Tillie Pierce Alleman, and it was published by Butternut and Blue and Stan Clark Military Books. Hey, did you know? The opening to every movie, "This is a work of fiction. Any similarity to actual persons living or dead or actual events is purely coincidental," is because of Rasputin? Yes, the Rasputin is to blame. In 1932, MGM released Rasputin and the Empress, a huge blockbuster with a glittering cast, which provided a sensational account of Rasputin's rise to power and his close relationship with the Tsarina. Prince Yusupov was still alive when the movie was released, and quite angered by the fabricated storyline in the film. So, he sued the studio. His wife was awarded over $127,000, the equivalent of almost $2.4 million today. The judge informed the studio that their mistake had been to claim that the movie was based on a true story. And so ever since, at the beginning of every movie, we are told, "This is a work of fiction. Any similarities to actual persons living or dead or actual events is purely coincidental." Who'da thunk it? So, what are you talking about tonight?
My story is about one woman's amazing imagination and what she created, the Nagoro Village of Dolls. The residents of Nagoro, Japan are just as busy as any other townsfolk, tending to their gardens, walking to work, sitting in classrooms. But if you try to interact with most of them, they won't give you the time of day. And that's because only 30 of the 400 residents are alive.
Wait, what?
Yep, only 30 of the 400 residents are alive.
Okay, continue.
The life-size dolls residing in Nagoro, otherwise known as the Scarecrow Village, outnumber the living population by over 10 to 1. Nagoro, which sits in what is known as the Eye of Valley, surrounded by vast mountainsides, blanketed by cedar trees, was never a big place. During the 1950s and 60s, the region was fueled by forestry, road construction, and dam building for hydroelectric plants. But once the dams were built, many of the people left. Even when Miss Sakumi Iona was a child, the population was only about 300. People have always been isolated here. It's an hour and a half driving along narrow, winding roads to get to the supermarket or even the nearest hospital. Miss Iona, the eldest of 4 siblings, moved out of Nagoro at age 12 when their father took a job at a food company in Osaka. She met and married her husband and raised children with him there. As he retired, Miss Iona's father returned to Nagoro to help take care of his ailing father-in-law and to nurse the wife who was going through kidney failure. In 2001, Miss Iona returned to the village to look after her father, who was 90 at the time, and he was the eldest resident. She was also disheartened to find that the village of 300 residents she remembered had dwindled down to only 30.
Oh, that's sad.
It's very sad. Although many of the residents had passed away, several had also moved. While taking care of her father, she planted a few radish and pea seeds in the field in front of her house. Birds kept digging them out, so she decided to make a scarecrow. But not just any generic one. She sewed a life-size replica of her father to amuse him.
That's cute.
It's so cool. In an interview in 2020, Miss Iona said, "It looked like a real human, not a conventional scarecrow. That's why it really worked." He didn't mind, but all the neighbors thought because the scarecrow was wearing his clothes and looked like him, that he was out farming very early in the morning. They would sometimes say, "Good morning, you're up to work very early this morning." It just started up a conversation between the scarecrow and the neighbors. Amused, Miss Iona added 3 or 4 dolls in the shape of women weeding the field and others on the side of the road. When a few travelers passing through asked some of the dolls for directions, Miss Iona was so tickled that she started making them full-time.
I can totally see this lady like in her house looking out the window behind the curtain, like giggling as people are talking to the dolls.
Scarecrow production line. What I find creepy is that she created each one, all 400 of them, in the image of departed or deceased villagers, and they are posed to doing very human-like things. Before long, the village earned the nickname Kakaki Shi Nasato, which means Valley of the Scarecrows, And Miss Ayano, now 73, is still crafting. So what are the dolls doing? Well, just about everything. Most of them are located along the roadside, farming and just hanging out. An old woman tends a roadside grave, while another rests in a wheelchair. Construction workers smoke cigarettes on break while others wait at the bus stop. A father pulls a wagon full of children. Random utility workers pose in the middle of a road, repairing lines while leisurely fishermen wait for their catch on a riverbank. A mischief maker shakes chestnuts from a tree. Some are even attending a wedding for a pair of dolls in traditional dresses.
I mean, that sounds like a lot, but you said that there's 400, quote, residents there, and only 30 are living people. So, I mean, can you imagine this little tiny village is just filled with these scarecrows?
Yeah, I can't imagine how much time and effort went into this, but she sounds like she enjoys it and it keeps her going. So
yeah,
it's quite the hobby.
For sure.
But not all the figures are visible from the road. The local elementary school closed in 2012. So yeah, Miss Ayano populated it with childlike dolls as well as an adult staff. Now the once abandoned school is home to the students anxiously waiting for class to start. Inside the school, dolls loiter on the stairwells or sit at desks in front of teachers giving lessons. We know Miss Ayano has a quirky sense of humor, so many of the students have impish expressions. In one classroom, 2 dolls sit at desk, representing the last 2 students who attended the school before it closed. These 2 little scarecrows, the children made those themselves during their home economics class, Miss Ayano said. And they put the clothes on them that they had wore back then onto the figures just before they left the school. Recreating a school sports day known as Undakai, a staple of the Japanese calendar, she has also posed child-sized dolls in a foot race. A few perch on the swing set and a few are tossing balls. We never see children here anymore. I wish there were more children because it would make me so much more cheerful. So I made the children.
Oh,
I know.
That's sweet.
The current residents of Nagoro seemingly enjoy the figures and can get annoyed when visitors sometimes think they're creepy. They were not pleased when one visitor wrote on the schoolhouse chalkboards, "Where are the living?"
Oh, that's mean. I don't like that person.
People are dicks sometimes. But you have to remember, most of the dolls are based on actual residents. Apparently, the figures have even been added to the census records with detailed descriptions of each one. The dolls are made from straw, fabric, newspapers, and old clothes. Miss Ayano is always making new ones to replace her older dolls that have worn out from being exposed to the elements. She says the mouths are the hardest part. The lips are the key to making many expressions appear realistic. She now gives occasional doll-making lessons in a nearby town to visitors at her studio, set up in the village's old nursery school. Sometimes she takes custom orders from around Japan. A doctor whose wife died of cancer asked for 2 replicas of his spouse, one to keep in the living room and another one for his bedroom.
See, there's a joke there, but I'm holding back because his wife died of cancer and I just can't. I can't make a joke. It wouldn't be right.
This is true. But people do a lot worse with dolls in their bedrooms.
You went there anyway.
Miss Ayana herself keeps a doll modeled after her grandmother in the passenger seat of her car. When driving the hour and a half to the grocery store, she said, "I'm never lonely." Each year she stages a sports festival at the old school with the help of volunteers. She may stay up all night, adding final touches, making last-minute repairs, and anchoring the dolls in place. Residents set up food stalls serving soba noodles, fried potatoes, and octopus balls. Octopus balls. Everything else sounds great.
They might be quite yummy.
Yeah, they may be, but I'm not going to go ask an octopus to see its balls, much less, eat them. Visitors come from all over to take part in the festivities. A few children may show up from nearby towns or while visiting their grandparents. During the tug of war, people join hands with the dolls who Miss Ayano has sewn to the rope. Many years there are not even enough human children, so competitors in their 80s join in. After the foot race one year, Mr. Hiroyuki Yamamoto, 82, a nursing home resident, stroked the cheek of a doll in one of the nearby running lanes. "She is so cute. I just wanted to talk to her." Keiko Motokawa, 67, grandmother of a toddler who resembled a doll himself, said that it was sad that Nagoro was known for the dolls rather than its people. "If these were real humans," said Miss Motokawa, "taking in the festivities, this would be a truly happy place."
Oh, well, it sounds to me like Miss Ayano has made it her happy place, and the rest of the villagers seem to buy into it and want to be part of it. They're part of the festivals that she holds each year. So, I mean, I see it as a collective community way to continue being happy and paying respects to the people that have come and gone.
Yeah, and I hope they continue visiting and supporting the place. And I hope that after she passes away, perhaps people will take up the tradition and keep the village going.
That would be wonderful.
That it would. Well, that about wraps it up for this show.
Yes, we hope to see all you wanderers again next week. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to traveling with you again to the places where our minds wander.
If you like what you heard, please take a moment and provide us with a 5-star rating and a comment. It really helps us move up the list so people can find us. See you next week for an all-new episode of Where Our Minds Wander.